Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to share and subscribe the channel. The twin suns of Loressa scorched the vast sand plains of Harmonia, the planet's capital settlement. Nick Sanders wiped sweat from his brow as the harsh morning light reflected off crystalline structures rising like mirages from the endless dunes. His boots sank slightly into the fine purple sand as he wandered beyond the climate-controlled confines of the Earth Embassy compound. Authorized personnel only beyond this point, Mr. Sanders, his wristcom intoned with Ambassador Kessler's pre-recorded warning. Nick tapped the device, silencing it. "Tell that to my sand-clogged air filters," he muttered. After 3 nights of listening to the howling desert winds against his quarters' walls, Nick had abandoned his bunk at first light, determined to see the real Loressa. The alien settlement was a marvel of adaptation, crystalline spires somehow anchored in the ever-shifting sands, bioluminescent desert plants cultivated to provide natural light barriers against sandstorms. His engineer's mind raced with questions about their survival techniques. He'd never understood diplomats who could visit alien worlds and remain sequestered in Earth-approximate bubbles. What was the point? His translator implant hummed as he passed 2 violet-skinned locals in flowing sand-resistant robes, their conversation filtered through the device with a half-second delay. After the first sun's rise, the breaking of harmony is severe. Deservedly so. She knew exactly what she was doing. Nick paused, adjusting his implant. The translation quality was excellent, but the conversation's context eluded him. Something about a punishment ahead. A growing crowd flowed toward a central plaza carved into the desert floor. Nick followed, telling himself it was anthropological curiosity, not the procrastinator's avoidance of the morning's scheduled meetings. The stream of purple-skinned citizens emptied into a vast circular depression in the sand. Unlike the surrounding architectural ingenuity, this plaza was deliberately austere, flat black stone embedded in the sand, unadorned walls of compacted earth, and at its center, a raised obsidian platform that shimmered with heat. "Excuse me," Nick said, tapping the shoulder of a shorter Loressian. "What's happening here?" The alien turned, gold-fed eyes widening at the sight of Nick's pale skin. "Off-worlder," they hissed, pulling their sand veil tighter and stepping away quickly. "Friendly bunch," Nick muttered. He'd been briefed on Loressian xenophobia, but the diplomatic files had emphasized their philosophical sophistication and desert adaptation skills, not their apparent distaste for foreigners. The crowd parted momentarily, giving Nick his first clear view of the platform. His breath caught. A woman knelt there, wrists bound to a central post with silver chains that glinted harshly in the sunlight. Her skin was the deepest violet Nick had ever seen, almost midnight blue in the rising heat waves. Her head remained unbowed despite the bindings, and when she raised her chin to face the growing crowd, her eyes flashed silver. Even from a distance, Nick recognized her extraordinary beauty, not merely by human standards, but with a kind of cross-species perfection that made his heart hammer against his ribs. A slender figure wrapped in torn white fabric, cascades of iridescent obsidian hair that defied the desert wind, features that seemed sculpted rather than grown. "Who is that?" he asked another bystander, who shuffled away without answering. A chime rang through the plaza, carried by the dry desert air. The murmuring crowd fell silent as 3 robed figures ascended to the platform, their ceremonial garments rippling in the hot breeze. The central figure, a female with elaborate hair decorations protected by a thin veil, stepped forward. "Elora Selmarin," she announced, voice carrying across the sand-swept depression. "You stand condemned of breaking harmony through willful disruption of natural order." Nick's translator struggled with certain phrases, but the malicious satisfaction in the speaker's tone needed no interpretation. "Would the accused speak before purification begins?" asked one of the other robed figures. The bound woman, Ira, lifted her head, sand grains cascading from her hair. "I have broken no harmony, Verica, as you well know," her voice carried clearly across the still desert air, "unless refusing your brother makes me guilty." A ripple moved through the crowd. The central accuser, Verica, stepped forward and struck Ira across the face. "The breaking is confirmed by your prideful denial," she announced. "Let the shame cleanse what reason cannot." Verica turned to the crowd, arms spread wide. "Who brings the first purification?" An older male stepped forward, clutching what looked like a dry desert branch. Without hesitation, he threw it at Ira. It struck her shoulder with a sharp crack. Nick watched in horror as another citizen stepped forward, then another, each bringing sticks or handfuls of sand to throw at the bound woman. Ira never flinched, never cried out, though her pristine white garment now bore streaks of dust and small tears where the projectiles had struck. Jesus Christ, Nick whispered. His diplomatic briefing had covered Lorsian desert agriculture, water conservation, politics, and solar energy trading protocols, not public torture rituals. A young Lorsian male approached the platform, carrying something larger than the others, a jagged rock. Nick's stomach twisted as the man's intentions became clear. "For the harmony you broke in my household," the man shouted, "when you refused to accept your proper place." He hurled the stone with vicious force. It struck Ira's cheek, drawing a rivulet of shimmering silver-blue blood that evaporated almost instantly in the desert heat. Something snapped in Nick's mind. He'd seen enough. "Stop," he bellowed, shoving through the crowd. His significantly larger human frame parted the Lorsians easily as he charged toward the platform. "What the hell is wrong with all of you?" He vaulted onto the obsidian stage, planting himself directly between her tormentors. A stick meant for her struck him across the back. The crowd froze in collective shock. The silence was absolute except for the whisper of sand shifting in the breeze. Nick turned to look at Ira, getting his first close view of her face. The silver blood trickled down her perfect features before crystallizing in the desert air, but her eyes, now deep indigo with what his implant registered as surprise, locked onto his. "Are you insane?" she whispered, the translator struggling with her dialect. "Leave the platform immediately." "Not while they're treating you like this," Nick replied, turning back to face the crowd. "I don't know what passes for justice in your philosophy books, but where I come from, we don't stone women in public squares." The oldest of the robed figures stepped forward cautiously, sand crunching beneath his ceremonial boots. "Off-worlder," he said in halting universal English, dismissing his translator with a wave, "you have invoked Tenkavus." "I've invoked common decency," Nick shot back. The elder's golden eyes narrowed beneath his protective desert veil. "Burden-sharing law, ancient, sacred. By receiving punishment meant for harmony breaker, you become." He struggled for the word, responsible for purification. Nick blinked, feeling desert grit in his eyes. "What?" Behind him, Ira made a small, hopeless sound. "Fool," she murmured. "You've claimed me." Verica recovered from her shock, anger twisting her features beneath her thin veil. "Elder Zen speaks truth. The off-worlder has invoked Tenkavus." Her lips curved in a cruel smile. He must now complete the punishment himself or take the breaker into his custody for purification through devotion. Nick's translator struggled with the cultural context but provided enough for him to understand the horrific choice: torture her himself or become her, what? Jailer. Keeper. "I'll take custody," he said firmly, without hesitation. Elder Zen nodded solemnly, sand falling from his ceremonial headdress. "Understand consequence. Until she cleansed, you bound to her. Cannot leave Loressa. Her actions your responsibility." "Fine," Nick snapped. "Now get these chains off her." The elder gestured, and one of the robed figures reluctantly approached with a key. As the silver chains fell away, Nick got his first good look at the damage. Bruises were forming on Ira's violet skin, and the cut on her cheek continued to seep silver blood that glittered strangely in the harsh sunlight. He offered his hand. She stared at it, then at him, indigo eyes swirling with conflicting emotions. "Why?" she asked simply. "Because it was wrong," Nick answered, sweat dripping down his temple. "And where I come from, we don't stand by watching wrong things happen." A flicker of something, hope? Skepticism, crossed her face before she took his hand and rose to her feet. Despite her ordeal, she moved with fluid grace, straightening to a height that reached his shoulder. "Your name, off-worlder?" she asked. "Nick. Nick Sanders." "Remember it well, Nick Sanders," she replied coolly. "You've just shackled yourself to a stranger's fate in a desert that devours the unprepared." The crowd parted as Nick guided her toward the plaza's edge. He felt hundreds of alien eyes burning into his back, heard the whispers his translator couldn't quite catch over the soft shifting of sand. "The Earth compound is this way," he said quietly, pointing toward the dome structures on the settlement's edge. Ira glanced at him, silver blood crystallizing on her cheek. "They won't let me in. I'm unclean until purified. Your climate domes would be considered contaminated. They'll make an exception. Your people don't understand." No one violates tankabos, not even diplomats. Nick frowned. Then where? We must go to your assigned dwelling. The law provides for that. As they reached the plaza's edge where stone met sand, Nick felt a hand grasp his arm. He turned to find Verica, her golden eyes burning with barely contained rage beneath her veil. You understand nothing of our ways, off-worlder, she hissed in accented universal. You think you've saved her, but you've merely prolonged her shame and chained yourself to it. Nick jerked his arm free, sand swirling around them. Better than watching a mob stone a woman for what? Being too pretty. Turning down the wrong guy. Your ways needed interrupting. Verica's lips curled. The breaking runs deeper than you can comprehend. She is poison to harmony. Her gaze shifted to Ira. And now you are bound to a corrupted vessel in a world where survival depends on unity. Enjoy your obligation. She stalked away, joining a tall male Lord Sion whose elaborate sand-resistant robes marked him as someone of importance. They watched Nick and Ira with calculating eyes. That's Kratos, Ira said quietly. Elder Zen's son. The one whose advances I declined. Charming family, Nick muttered. Let's get out of this heat. They moved through harmonious sand-swept paths, drawing stares and whispers. Ira kept her head high despite her disheveled appearance. Nick noticed how Lord Sion's gave them a wide berth, some making strange gestures as they passed. They're warding off disharmony, Ira explained, catching his glance. I'm considered contagious until cleansed, like a poison in the water supply. This is insane, Nick said, shielding his eyes from the increasing glare of the twin suns. What happened to the advanced philosophical society I read about? Ira's laugh held no humor. Those texts are ancient history. Loressa hasn't been that world for generations, not since the great sandstorms. Now we preserve only the forms of philosophy while practicing its shadow, just as we preserve the forms of civilization while the desert reclaims everything. They reached a modest dwelling at the edge of the diplomatic quarter, Nick's temporary housing, partially buried in the sand for natural insulation and separated from the main compound for engineers working on water conservation projects. Home sweet home, he said, waving his hand over the entry panel. The door slid open, releasing a blast of cooler air. It's not much, but it's better than an obsidian post in the sun. Ira hesitated at the threshold, sand swirling around her feet. Once I enter, the bond is formalized. You understand that? Not really, Nick admitted, but I'm getting the distinct impression I've stepped in something a lot deeper than desert quicksand. She studied him, her eyes shifting from indigo to a swirling violet silver. You truly don't know what you've done, do you? By invoking tankabos, you've claimed responsibility for my purification. Until I'm declared cleansed, we are bound together. You cannot leave the planet, cannot transfer the obligation. My actions become your responsibility, my failures your shame. Nick ran a hand through his sand-gritty hair. So I've essentially married you under your law. Worse, Ira replied without a trace of humor. You become my purifier, my judge, my keeper, and my potential executioner should I fail to be cleansed. I'd never. Perhaps not, but that is what you've claimed. She straightened her torn garment with dignity. So I ask once more, do you accept this burden, Nick Sanders of Earth? There is still time to return me to the plaza. Nick looked at the silver blood crystallizing on her cheek, at the bruises forming on her arms, at the unwavering pride in her alien eyes. Whatever tangled web of cultural obligation he'd ensnared them in, he couldn't regret stopping what he'd witnessed. I accept, he said firmly. Now please come in before we both get sunstroke. Ira stepped across the threshold, her movements suddenly ritual and deliberate. Then by the ancient law of tankabos, I am in your keeping until cleansed through devotion or released through completion. Nick's wristcom chimed aggressively, sand particles scattering from its speaker. Ambassador Kessler's voice cut through the room, Sanders. The Lord Sion High Council is demanding an explanation for your disruption of some ritual. What the hell have you done? Across the diplomatic quarter, Verica watched the dwelling's door close behind the off-worlder and his new charge. Kratos stepped to her side, his ornate ceremonial garments rippling in the hot desert wind. Was this your plan all along, sister? He asked softly. To drive her to a breaking judgment. Verica's lips curved into a satisfied smile. Plans adapt to opportunity like desert plants to drought. The off-worlder's intervention was unexpected but potentially more useful than a simple shaming. How so? She turned to her brother, golden eyes gleaming with calculated malice beneath her veil. The Earth mission cannot afford a diplomatic incident. When they learn what their engineer has done, claimed a harmony breaker under Tenevos, they'll pressure him to abandon her. And when he does, then she becomes twice broken, abandoned by her purifier. Verika's voice dropped to a whisper. A fate worse than death in our oldest laws. No one will speak her name again. Her family will be stripped of status, and you, brother, will be free of her rejection forever. Kratos smiled coldly, desert sand catching in his teeth. And if he doesn't abandon her? Then we ensure they fail the purification rituals. Verika clasped her brother's hand. Either way, the off-worlder has just given us exactly what we need to destroy them both. What the hell were you thinking, Sanders? Ambassador Kessler paced the narrow confines of Nick's sand-buried dwelling, her diplomatic uniform immaculate despite the desert heat. Interfering in a local judicial ceremony? Invoking ancient laws you don't understand? The Lorcian High Council is demanding your immediate withdrawal from the planet. Nick stood his ground, arms crossed. Behind him, Ira sat silently in the dwelling's small cooling alcove, her violet skin still bearing the marks of her public shaming. They were stoning her, Ambassador. Not metaphorically, literally throwing rocks at a woman tied to a post. Kessler pinched the bridge of her nose. Cultural relativism, Sanders. We're guests here. We observe, we don't interfere, even with practices we don't understand. Even with torture. Even with practices we don't understand, Kessler lowered her voice. Look, I get that your heart was in the right place, but you've created a diplomatic nightmare. Do you have any idea what Tank Avus entails? Nick glanced toward Ira. I'm getting a clearer picture by the minute. Jamal Wright, the mission's cultural liaison officer, cleared his throat. He'd arrived with Kessler, his lanky frame practically vibrating with anxiety. It's complicated, Nick. According to Lorcian law, you've essentially claimed guardianship of a condemned criminal until she completes a purification process, which has about 16 stages, by the way. You're bound to her, can't leave the planet, can't return to regular duties. And the Earth mission cannot afford to have one of our lead water purification engineers sidelined for what could be months, Kessler added. The Council is suggesting we relinquish her and pay a cultural infraction fine. Nick's jaw tightened. Relinquish her to what? Jamal and Kessler exchanged uncomfortable glances. To become twice broken, Ira said from her corner, her melodious voice startling them all. Abandoned by my purifier after claiming. It is a fate that renders one less than nothing. My family would lose all status. My name would be struck from records. I would be exiled to the far dunes where even water is considered too precious to waste on the twice broken. A heavy silence fell over the room. Kessler's diplomatic mask cracked slightly. I'm not abandoning her, Nick said flatly. Sanders. Not negotiable, Ambassador. I started this. I'll finish it. Kessler's eyes narrowed. You have duties, responsibilities. And I'll continue them. The water purification project can proceed with me working remotely. I'll participate in these rituals, whatever they are, and get her cleared. But I'm not throwing her to the wolves because it's politically convenient. Wolves would be kinder than what awaits the twice broken, Ira murmured. Kessler studied Nick's face, then sighed deeply. 48 hours, Sanders. I'll stall the Council for that long. If you haven't found a reasonable way out of this by then, I'm ordering your extraction, for your own good. After they left, Nick slumped against the wall. Exhaustion crashed over him, the adrenaline that had carried him through the morning's events fading, leaving only the weight of his impulsive decision. You should have let them take me, Ira said quietly. You don't understand what you've committed to. Nick turned to face her. In the dwelling's artificial light, her violet skin took on an almost luminous quality. The cut on her cheek had stopped bleeding but left a silvery trace like metallic war paint. Then explain it to me, he said. What exactly does being your purifier entail? Ira rose from her seat with fluid grace. First, cleansing of the dwelling. Your home must be prepared to receive one who has broken harmony. And how do we do that? With these, she reached into a hidden pocket in her torn garment and produced a small bag, opening it to reveal a handful of crystalline sand grains that shimmered with internal light. Desert tears. They absorbed disharmony. Nick watched, fascinated, as Ira moved methodically around his dwelling, placing tiny piles of the luminescent sand in each corner. As they settled, they seemed to pulse in rhythm, like a heartbeat. Second, she continued, the breaker must be cleansed. I require water. Nick pointed toward the dwelling's hygiene unit. Showers in there, limited to 4 minutes to conserve water. Not that kind of cleansing, Ira interrupted. Ritual cleansing. You must pour the water. Nick blinked. I have to bathe you. For the first time, something like amusement flickered in Ira's indigo eyes. Does that disturb your earthly sensibilities, Nick Sanders? He stopped, recognizing the trap. If he admitted discomfort, he'd reveal weakness. If he seemed eager, he'd confirm whatever suspicions she harbored about his motives. I just want to make sure I understand the ritual properly. Ira's lips curved slightly. A diplomatic answer. She gestured to a ceramic basin near his dwelling's water recycler. Fill that with exactly 16 measures of water. No more, no less. I will prepare. While Nick carefully measured water into the basin, Ira retreated to the hygiene unit. She emerged moments later wearing only a thin shift of translucent material that left little to the imagination. Jesus, he muttered. Is something wrong? Ira asked, her voice innocent but her eyes challenging. Nope. All good. Just not what I expected. Nick set the basin down carefully, keeping his eyes on her face. So what do I do? Kneel, she instructed, and wash away the marks of breaking. Nick knelt before her, dipping his hands into the cool water. With careful restraint, he began washing the dirt and dried silver blood from her face, neck, and arms. Her skin felt like silk beneath his fingertips, radiating an unexpected warmth. Your hands are gentle for a species that claims so many stars, Ira observed, studying his face. We're not all conquerors, Nick replied, focusing on a particularly stubborn smudge on her shoulder rather than the way the thin fabric clung to her curves. Some of us just fix things. Is that what you're doing with me? Fixing. Nick looked up, meeting her gaze directly. No. I'm righting a wrong. There's a difference. Something shifted in Ira's expression, a microscopic softening around her eyes. The water turned silver, she said, nodding toward the basin. It absorbs the breaking. Nick glanced down. Indeed, the clear water had developed a metallic sheen, as though her silver blood had dissolved into it. What happens next? He asked, standing and drying his hands. Now we wait. The council will send notification of the first purification trial by morning. Ira glanced around the small dwelling. Where shall I sleep? Nick pointed to the dwelling's single sleeping platform. You take the bed. I'll use the floor cushions. Ira tilted her head. That is unexpected. As purifier, the sleeping arrangement is yours to command. Yeah, well, this purifier doesn't command sleeping arrangements with people who've just been through trauma, Nick said firmly. Take the bed. Get some rest. As he arranged the cushions on the floor, Ira watched him with unreadable eyes. You are strange, Nick Sanders, she finally said. I cannot decide if you are foolish or something else entirely. Story of my life, Nick muttered as he settled onto his makeshift bed. Get some sleep. I have a feeling tomorrow is going to be a long day. The first test came at dawn. A Lorsian official arrived bearing a sealed scroll in a box of fine sand. The ritual required Nick to craft a small sculpture from the sand, representing his understanding of harmony. As a water engineer, his hands were steady enough, but his knowledge of Lorsian aesthetics was non-existent. It's a test designed for failure, Ira whispered as he struggled. The sandcraft is meant to reveal your inner disharmony. Nick frowned at his lopsided attempt at a spiral. Got any tips? I cannot help directly, she said, then added softly, but true harmony flows like water through stone. Taking her hint, Nick abandoned his rigid approach and let the sand flow between his fingers more naturally. The resulting shape resembled a wave breaking against a shore, not traditional Lorsian design, but fluid and balanced. The official studied it with narrowed eyes, then made a notation on the scroll. Acceptable, he pronounced reluctantly. First trial passed. 6 more trials followed over the next 3 days, each designed to test Nick's commitment to Ira's purification. He had to recite Lorsian philosophy, Ira's whispered coaching saved him, stand motionless in the desert sun while balancing a water vessel, his earthborn muscles screamed, and defend his actions before a minor council. His diplomatic training barely sufficed. Between trials, they spent hours confined to his dwelling, where Ira's behavior grew increasingly perplexing. The cold suspicion of their first day gave way to calculated provocations. She accidentally dropped things and bent to retrieve them in ways that displayed her lithe figure to maximum advantage. She asked innocently intrusive questions about human mating habits. She emerged from the hygiene unit wearing progressively less clothing, explaining each time that it was part of the purification process. Is making me uncomfortable actually a requirement of your cleansing? Nick finally asked on the 4th evening, after she'd spent an hour performing what she claimed was a traditional meditation dance that looked suspiciously like an erotic performance. Ira paused mid-stretch, her violet skin glistening with exertion. You find me uncomfortable. I find your games uncomfortable, Nick clarified. You're testing me, waiting for me to act like whatever monster you've decided I am. She straightened, abandoning the pretense of ritual. Is it so wrong to test the cage before trusting the keeper? I'm not your keeper. Legally, you are exactly that. Nick ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Look, I get it. You have no reason to trust me. But these little provocations aren't helping either of us get through this situation. Ira studied him thoughtfully. Most men would have taken advantage by now. Purifiers traditionally exercise complete control over those they cleanse. The historic texts are explicit. I'm not most men, and I'm definitely not a traditional purifier. I'm just a guy who couldn't watch someone be abused. Nick sighed. Can we start over? Actually talk instead of you setting traps and me trying not to fall into them. A moment of silence passed between them. Finally, Ira nodded. What would you like to know, Nick Sanders? Everything. Why were you really condemned? What happens if these trials fail? How did Loressa end up with these brutal customs? Ira settled onto a cushion, her expression shifting from guarded to contemplative. Loressa was once different. The ancient texts speak of gardens that bloomed across the dunes, of philosophers who debated meaning beneath crystal domes. Then came the great sandstorms, decades of environmental collapse that nearly destroyed our civilization. She traced patterns in a small pile of sand on the floor. When resources dwindled, so did compassion. The philosophy of harmony became weaponized, a tool to maintain order. Those who challenged authority were labeled breakers and publicly shamed. It preserved the hierarchy while giving the masses an outlet for their fear and anger. And you became a target because I create beauty that reminds people of what we've lost. For the first time, genuine emotion colored Ira's voice. I sculpt sand into forms that capture water and nurture life, practical art that challenges the council's narrative that Loressa must remain barren except where they permit growth. She met his eyes. My work gained followers. People began using my designs in their own dwellings, creating microgardens that didn't depend on council water rations. Kratos took interest in my work initially, then in me. When I refused his advances, the breaking judgment followed swiftly. Nick absorbed this, pieces falling into place. So this was never about harmony. It was about control, about silencing innovation and removing a woman who dared say no to power. Yes, Ira added softly. Their conversation continued deep into the night. Nick described Earth's own environmental struggles, the legacy of authoritarianism his ancestors had fought to overcome. Ira explained Lorsian art forms, the subtle resistance hidden in traditional patterns. As barriers lowered, Nick found himself captivated not just by her beauty, but by her resilience and intelligence. Your planet has faced similar challenges, yet you've maintained compassion, Ira observed. Nick considered this. We came close to losing it many times. Maybe the difference is that we never incorporated cruelty into our recovery narrative. We remembered that surviving together was the point, not just surviving. Ira's expression softened. Perhaps that is the harmony we've forgotten. The 7th day brought their greatest challenge. A senior council member arrived with a scroll bearing the official seal of Elder Zen. The purifier is summoned to demonstrate his dominion over the breaking. The message must be acknowledged before cleansing can proceed. After the messenger departed, Ira's face turned ashen. "This is Verika's doing," she whispered. "What does it mean?" "The purifier must publicly discipline the breaker," she explained, voice tight. "Traditionally, it involves physical correction, a return to the plaza of shame." Nick's stomach clenched. "Absolutely not. If you refuse, the purification fails," Ira said. "I become twice broken." "There has to be another way," Nick insisted, pacing the dwelling. "Some loophole, some alternative interpretation." "There isn't." Ira watched him with growing concern. "This is why I warned you from the beginning. The system is designed to perpetuate shame, not dispel it." Nick slammed his fist against the wall in frustration, sending sand cascading from the ceiling. "I won't hurt you. I won't drag you back to that plaza. Then they will separate us, and everything you've endured will be for nothing." Ira stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. "Nick, listen to me. There is no winning move here. Verika has engineered this precisely because she knows your Earth ethics won't allow you to continue." The wristcom chimed, displaying a message from Ambassador Kessler. "Final warning, Sanders. Extraction team arrives tomorrow at dawn. The situation has become untenable." "That's an order." Nick looked from the message to Ira, decision crystallizing in his mind. "We're leaving." "Leaving? How? Where?" "My engineering team has a sand skimmer for reaching remote water testing sites. It can get us to the Far Dunes outpost by morning. From there, what? I am bound to Loressa until cleansed. The tracking implant all breakers receive ensures it." Ira pushed back her hair, revealing a small silver disc embedded at the base of her skull. Nick's engineering mind raced. "That can be dealt with. The question is, are you willing to leave? To abandon everything on a chance?" Ira hesitated. "What would happen to me on Earth? Refugee status, probably. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be better than exile to the Far Dunes." Before she could respond, a gentle chime echoed through the dwelling, not the harsh alert of Nick's wristcom, but the softer tone of a Lorsian communication. A small sand sphere near the door glowed and projected the image of an elderly Lorsian male. "I am Elder Soren," the projection announced. "I must speak with the purifier and the breaking one immediately." "Alone?" Nick exchanged a glance with Ira, who nodded cautiously. "Granted," Nick responded. The sand sphere flashed, and moments later, the dwelling's door slid open to admit a stooped figure in plain robes, nothing like the elaborate garments of the council elders. "Forgive the intrusion," Elder Soren said, his voice surprisingly strong for his apparent age. "I come with urgency and secrecy." "What do you want?" Nick asked, positioning himself between the elder and Ira. "To offer what few remember exists." Soren produced an ancient scroll from his robes. "The path of mutual devotion." Ira gasped softly. "That is myth, Elder. A children's tale." "No, child. Before I was keeper of historical records, I was keeper of forgotten truths." Soren unrolled the scroll carefully. When breaking was still a philosophical concept rather than a punishment, cleansing could be achieved through mutual sacrifice, purifier and breaking one each demonstrating willingness to bear the other's burden. Nick leaned forward. "What does that mean in practice?" "It means," Soren said, "that instead of public discipline, you may invoke Tenkavozashar, the trial of shared fate. You would both face those who accused her in ritual combat. Victory would cleanse her fully and release your bond." "Combat?" Nick repeated. "Against whom?" "The primary accusers, in this case, Verika and Kratos." Soren's golden eyes glittered. "I have watched their machinations with disgust. They pervert our traditions to serve personal vendetta." Ira stepped forward. "Why help us, Elder?" "Because I remember what Loressa was," Soren touched a gnarled finger to the scroll, "and I see in your water-capturing sculptures the echo of what we might become again." After Soren departed, Nick and Ira stood in silence, the ancient scroll between them on the table. "Combat," Nick finally said. "I'm guessing this isn't just a friendly match." "No. The ritual staffs used in Tenkavozashar cause real pain, though they're not designed to kill." Ira's expression was troubled. "Kratos has trained with them since childhood. Verika is known for her vicious technique. And us. I have some training. All artists learn basic defense, but you. I did 4 years of Krav Maga in college, Nick offered. When Ira looked confused, he added, Earth combat training. Not exactly ritual staff fighting, but I'm not completely helpless. Ira studied him, her expression softening into something new, not the calculated seduction of her earlier provocations, but genuine concern. You would risk this for someone you barely know? Nick considered the question, realizing with surprise that his answer had changed over their days together. What had begun as ethical obligation had evolved into something more complex, admiration, connection, and yes, attraction that went beyond the physical. I know enough, he said simply. I know you're worth fighting for. For the first time, Ira's smile reached her eyes, transforming her face with genuine warmth. She stepped closer, placing a hand against his cheek. Then perhaps we are both learning something about devotion. The space between them charged with unspoken possibility. Nick found himself leaning slightly forward, drawn by something more powerful than physical attraction, the recognition of a kindred spirit. Elder Soren mentioned mutual sacrifice, Ira murmured. Are you certain you're prepared for what that means? No, Nick admitted, but I'm willing to find out. Her fingers traced his jawline with newfound tenderness. Then let us invoke Tenkavu's Sasher together. As the twin suns set beyond the dunes, casting the dwelling in amber light, Nick sent his response to the council. They would not appear for the public discipline. Instead, they formally requested the trial of shared fate, invoking the ancient rite of mutual devotion. The response came swiftly, a single line of text that appeared in the sand sphere. Request granted. Central Arena, tomorrow at first light. Prepare yourselves. The pre-dawn air carried a bitter chill that cut through Nick's Earth-standard clothing as he and Ira approached the central arena. Unlike the crude plaza of shame, this structure was an architectural marvel, a perfect circle carved deep into the bedrock beneath Harmonia, its walls embedded with crystalline formations that caught and amplified the faintest light. I've got a bad feeling about this, Nick muttered, watching shadows move behind the crystal walls. That crowd looks bigger than I expected. Ira's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his own. The casual intimacy of the gesture startled him, a stark contrast to her calculated provocations of days past. The trial of shared fate hasn't been invoked in generations, she explained. Many have come to witness what they consider historical curiosity. Others, her voice hardened, others have come to watch the off-worlder fail. Nick squeezed her hand. Then we'll have to disappoint them. Elder Soren waited at the arena's entrance, his ancient frame somehow more dignified in the formal robes of a trial witness. Without speaking, he handed each of them a small vial of shimmering liquid. Pre-combat purification, Ira whispered, uncapping hers. It heightens awareness and dulls pain. Drink it quickly. It tastes like sand lizard urine. Nick raised an eyebrow. And you know that because? Her lips quirked. Just drink it, Earthman. The liquid burned like alcohol laced with chili peppers, leaving a metallic aftertaste that made Nick's sinuses tingle. Almost immediately, the arena's crystal walls seemed to pulse with sharper definition, and the whispers of the gathering crowd separated into distinct voices. Does everything always look this intense on Loressa? He asked, blinking rapidly. Only when you're about to fight for your life, Ira replied, but the lightness in her tone didn't mask the tension in her shoulders. Nick, there's something you should know before we enter. The staffs we'll be using, they don't just cause pain. They reveal truth. Meaning that in the heat of combat, when adrenaline and the serum mix, your deepest feelings become visible through your skin, like bioluminescence. The lore Sions call it soul light. She hesitated. It's why the trial of shared fate is considered definitive. You cannot fake devotion when the staffs activate. Nick processed this new information, wondering what truths his skin might betray. Before he could respond, a gong resonated through the crystal chamber, its vibrations rattling his teeth. Time, Soren announced solemnly. Enter and be judged. They stepped into the arena together. The acoustics of the chamber amplified the crowd's murmurs into a disorienting wave of sound that broke against Nick's heightened senses. At the center of the perfect circle stood Verica and Kratos, already holding their ritual staffs, elegant crystalline rods that pulsed with internal energy. Elder Zen occupied a raised platform, his ceremonial robes glittering with embedded sand crystals. Around him sat the full council, their expressions varying from fascination to open hostility. "Approach," Zen commanded, his amplified voice echoing off the crystal walls. Nick and Ira walked forward, their footsteps synchronized without conscious effort. For ritual staff stood embedded in a sandstone block at the arena's center. "The ancient trial of Tenka Vosashar has been invoked," Zen announced to the crowd. "The Purifier and the Breaking One seek to prove mutual devotion through willingness to bear each other's burdens." He turned his golden gaze to Nick. "Off-worlder, do you understand that failure in this trial condemns both of you? That victory requires both combatants to succeed?" Nick nodded. "I understand." "And you, Ira Selmar, Breaking One, do you understand that this trial may end in your permanent exile should you fail to demonstrate true devotion?" Ira stood taller. "I understand, Elder." Zen gestured to the staffs. "Then begin." The accusers face those they accused. Victory comes only when both opponents are disarmed. But beware, for killing is forbidden, such disharmony would result in immediate condemnation. Nick reached for a staff, surprised by its lightness. The crystal seemed to vibrate against his palm, almost hungry for contact. Across from him, Kratos smiled coldly, twirling his staff with practiced ease. "The human thinks he can master Lore Sion combat," Kratos sneered, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "I will educate you before I reclaim what is rightfully mine." Nick said nothing, remembering his Krav Maga instructor's first lesson, let them talk. Every word is breath wasted. At Zen's signal, the combat began. Kratos attacked immediately, his staff whirling in complex patterns that forced Nick into desperate defense. Each contact between the staffs sent painful energy pulses up Nick's arms. His Earth combat training had prepared him for direct confrontation, not this dance of crystalline weapons and energy discharges. Through peripheral vision, he glimpsed Ira and Verica engaged in their own deadly choreography. Ira moved with unexpected grace, her smaller stature allowing her to evade Verica's more powerful strikes. "You fight like a sand scavenger," Kratos taunted as he pressed his advantage, driving Nick back toward the arena wall. "Desperate. Graceless." Nick grunted as a particularly vicious strike connected with his shoulder, sending a paralyzing jolt through his left arm. The staff nearly slipped from his grasp. "And you fight like someone who's never faced an opponent who fights back," Nick countered, switching tactics. Instead of meeting Kratos' elaborate flourishes, he began fighting Earth-style, direct, efficient, unpredictable. Surprise flickered across Kratos' face as Nick suddenly closed distance rather than retreating. A quick feint left, then a sweeping low strike nearly connected with the Laurentian's knees. "She was never yours to claim," Nick growled, pressing his unexpected advantage. "People aren't possessions. Says the man who invoked Purifier rights," Kratos shot back, recovering his stance. "To protect her, not own her." Their staffs connected with a crack that sent crystalline fragments flying. The crowd gasped as energy discharged invisible arcs between the weapons. Across the arena, Verica had gained the upper hand against Ira, driving her toward the center with increasingly vicious strikes. One connected with Ira's side, sending her to one knee with a cry of pain that cut through Nick's concentration. Kratos seized the opening, sweeping Nick's feet from under him. He crashed hard onto the sand-covered floor, his staff skittering from his grasp. The point of Kratos' weapon pressed against his chest, painful energy pulsing through his sternum. "As I predicted," Kratos announced triumphantly to the crowd. "The off-worlder lacks the discipline to..." His victory speech cut short as a violet blur interposed itself between them. Ira had abandoned her own fight to throw herself between Nick and the final blow, a mirror image of his intervention days earlier in the Plaza of Shame. The staff struck her squarely across the back. Instead of crying out, she remained perfectly still, her eyes locked with Nick's. And then it happened. Light bloomed beneath her violet skin, not the silver of her blood, but a warm golden radiance that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. The soul light Ira had described, made visible by the staff's energy and the combat serum. The crowd fell silent, transfixed by the unmistakable evidence of true devotion. "Protocol violation." Verica shrieked, advancing with her staff raised. "The Breaking One has abandoned her designated combat." But her protest died as Nick rolled to his feet in a single fluid motion, retrieving his fallen staff. The movement brought him protectively in front of Ira, his back to Kratos. "Take my burden," he said clearly, the ritual words coming to him without thought, "as I have taken yours." As he spoke, his own skin began to glow, warm amber light pulsing through his human complexion in patterns that mimicked Ira's. The crowd's silence deepened with renewed awe. With renewed focus, Nick turned to face Kratos again. His earlier clumsiness with the staff vanished as some deeper understanding guided his movements. The staff felt like an extension of himself now, responding to intention rather than technique. Kratos attacked in desperation, his earlier confidence shattered by the visible evidence of mutual devotion. His strikes grew wild, predictable. Nick parried easily, then countered with a simple direct thrust that knocked the staff from Kratos' hands. The Lord Sion fell to his knees, defeat written across his features. Nick raised his staff for the finishing strike, then deliberately planted it in the sand beside his opponent. "Harmony doesn't come from domination," he announced, his voice carrying through the crystal chamber. "It comes from balance, from choice." Behind him, Ira had regained her footing. With a series of swift, elegant movements, she disarmed the still protesting Verica, sending the woman's staff spinning into the air. When it clattered to the ground, Ira stood over it but made no move to deliver a final strike. "True cleansing comes from choosing compassion when vengeance is possible," she declared, her voice steady despite the pain she must have been feeling. "I reject the breaking judgment and claim the ancient right of harmony through mutual truth." The soul light beneath their skin pulsed in perfect synchronization, casting golden reflections across the crystal walls. Nick extended his hand, and Ira took it, their fingers intertwining as they faced the Elder Council together. Elder Zen rose slowly, his expression unreadable. For a moment that stretched into eternity, he simply stared at them. Then, to the shock of the assembly, he descended from the platform and approached Elder Soren. "The ancient texts," Zen demanded. "Show them." Soren produced the scroll from his robes, unrolling it with reverent care. Zen studied it, then faced the crowd. "It is written," he announced, "when protector and protected each bear the other's burden willingly, when soul light reveals undisguised truth, the circle of purification is complete. The trial of shared fate has been satisfied." He turned to Nick and Ira. "Ira Samarin is declared cleansed. The off-worlder is released from obligation." The pronouncement hung in the air for a heartbeat before the crowd erupted, not in protest as Nick had feared, but in a sound that took him a moment to recognize. It was awe. Many Lord Sions were approaching the council platform, speaking urgently to various elders. "What's happening?" Nick asked as the soul light gradually faded from their skin. "They're invoking their own trials," Ira explained, wonder in her voice. "Others who have been wrongfully condemned are claiming the right of shared fate." Ambassador Kessler pushed through the crowd, her diplomatic composure momentarily abandoned in favor of open astonishment. "Sanders, what the hell did you just do?" "Apparently," Nick replied with a tired smile, "I just participated in a cultural revolution." 3 days later, Nick stood at the boarding ramp of the Earth diplomatic vessel, watching the final preparations for departure. His mission on Loressa was complete, the water purification project successfully transferred to local engineers, with Ira's faction providing sustainable collection designs. "Are you sure about this?" he asked as Ira approached, now dressed in formal Lord Sion traveling robes. The silver tracking implant had been removed from her neck, leaving a small scar that would fade with time. "About leaving Loressa, or about coming with you," she countered, amusement dancing in her now silver eyes. "Both, I guess." She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the desert spice scent of her hair. "The council has appointed me cultural ambassador to Earth, the first in our history. It would be politically awkward to refuse." "Very politically awkward," Nick agreed, fighting a smile. "And personally?" Ira glanced back at the gathering of Lord Sions who had come to witness their departure, including Elder Soren and, surprisingly, Elder Zen himself. "Loressa is changing, Nick. The trial of shared fate has been invoked 17 times since our combat. The breaking judgments are being reviewed, but change takes time. And needs to come from within," he finished for her. "Yes, which is why I will return eventually." Her hand found his, soul light briefly flickering beneath both their skins at the contact, a permanent side effect of the combat serum, according to Soren. "But first, I believe I owe my purifier a proper education in Lord Sion art forms on Earth." Nick laughed. "Is that what we're calling it now? Would you prefer mutual cultural exchange?" "I'd prefer honesty," Nick said, his tone softening, "after all we've been through." Ira's expression grew serious. Then honestly, Nick Sanders, I wish to see the stars with someone who understands that harmony isn't about control or punishment, it's about balance, connection. Her fingers tightened around his. And I believe we have only begun to discover ours. The boarding chime sounded, signaling final call for departure. Together, they ascended the ramp into the vessel's cool interior. From the observation deck, they watched as Laressa fell away beneath them, first the sprawling sand dunes of Harmonia, then the vast purple deserts, until finally the entire planet was visible as a swirling orb of amethyst continents bordered by silver oceans. It's beautiful from up here, Nick observed. You can't see the broken parts. But we know they're there, Ira replied, and now so do others. She leaned against him, her head fitting perfectly against his shoulder. Do you regret it? Stepping into the plaza that day. Nick considered the question, remembering the impulse that had driven him to interfere. What had begun as simple human decency had evolved into something he never could have anticipated, not just the political ramifications for Laressa, but the personal transformation he'd undergone. Not for a second, he answered honestly, though I might have appreciated a cultural briefing on the whole claiming thing beforehand. Ira laughed, the sound like music after the tension of the past days. Where would be the adventure in that? Fair point. He turned to face her fully. So, cultural ambassador, what's the most important thing I should know about Lorsian customs before we reach Earth? Her eyes sparkled mischievously. Well, there is one ritual we haven't properly observed, she murmured, rising on her toes to bring her face closer to his. The sealing of devotion, traditionally performed after soul light has been revealed. Is it complicated? Nick asked, his voice dropping to match hers. Lots of steps to remember. Actually, Ira whispered, closing the final distance between them, it's remarkably similar to an Earth custom I've been curious about since the moment you stepped between me and those stones. As Laressa dwindled to a distant purple jewel against the black velvet of space, Nick discovered that some forms of harmony transcended cultural differences entirely. They threw sticks and stones at you, he murmured when they finally parted, and somehow we ended up here. Ira smiled against his lips. Perhaps that's the truest meaning of purification, finding the courage to transform pain into possibility. Now that, Nick said, drawing her back into his arms as Earth's distant sun appeared in the view screen, is a philosophy I can get behind. Dear listeners, and so concludes Sticks and Stones, The Atonement of Ira, a tale of two beings from different planets whose paths crossed in the sands of a distant world where tradition intertwined with cruelty and justice gave way to control. We witnessed the journey of Nick Sanders, an ordinary Earth engineer whose simple sense of justice sparked a cultural revolution on an entire planet. We met the proud and talented Ira, an artist whose spirit couldn't be broken even by the harshest trials. But perhaps their story is just beginning. Would you like to discover what happens next for Nick and Ira? How would the violet-skinned artist adapt to life on Earth? What culture shocks and amusing misunderstandings might await her? How would Earth's inhabitants react to her unusual appearance, talents, and culture? Are you curious to see how their relationship develops away from the sands of Laressa, and what new challenges life on Earth might present? What role would Ira play as the first cultural ambassador from her planet? And of course, what awaits them upon their return to a changing Laressa? Let me know if you'd like a continuation of the story. Perhaps the adventures of Nick and Ira are only beginning, with new worlds, new challenges, and new discoveries ahead, both in each other and in the vast universe.